Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
SCION of the Tree. A horror story from Reddit. Nosleep. It was 2 months ago when I got the news. The moment I saw the caller ID, my skin turned cold, and my bones became weak. Lakewood Medical Center Emergency Room. I left the warehouse and headed straight there, wasting no time. She was still alive when I got the call, but just barely. Did not matter. She passed before I made it to the front door. It was 2 months ago that my wife, Amber, died. She was 6 months pregnant with our Rose. We were expecting an angel, a light to bring to our everyday lives. We moved into the area for our child, both deciding where we wanted to start our lives as a family. She wanted a blue house, I wanted something by the mountains. We picked the perfect combination of the two. I collapsed on the ground when I heard what had happened. The doctor assured me her death was quick and painless, and that they had done everything to save her and our child. The other driver died in the collision as well, and it was immediately obvious that it was the act of a drunk driver. I sat motionless in the room for hours, drying eyes staring at the clinical lights as I tried to hold myself from shaking to death. It was 2 months ago that I first saw it. As bright as the patient room was, there was a thin growth of shadow starting along the side of the otherwise pristine walls, small filaments creeping along the interior in a twisted but intelligent manner. It looked like a growth of mold, something a tad unnatural, but I really was not in the mindset to question anything. With tear-soaked eyes, I watched it slowly grow, but convinced myself it was a grief-driven hallucination. And if it was not? Well, I did not really care. The weeks following have been cold. Forgettable. Quick. I barely remember the funeral. My eulogy was short. I could not say many words without breaking apart. Her family kept to themselves, and I was left to burden my own sorrow. I left the funeral home having provided only one real message. I loved her. Everywhere I went, every room I entered, it was there. A spindly shadowy chute, climbing up along the walls, sometimes hidden under a table or behind curtains. There was only one constant. It was growing, albeit very slowly. I did not give it any attention. It did not deserve my recognition, not when my entire world had been so effortlessly ripped from me. Weeks passed. I lost my job. The house became my prison. The world was impartial to my grief, so I became impartial to it. I really did not need to leave, I had savings for months. I welcomed the comforting coldness of independence while I reconciled with what happened. I took up smoking. Then promised I had quit. Then I took up smoking again. The phone would ring, but nobody would answer. I was turned off. I was not a man, but a ghoul living in a tired body. I spent my nights in front of the television, fake light bouncing off my dreary face and into the void. I always held a cigarette in my hand, choosing the reality where everything was dizzy and sick over the one where I had to confront the looming darkness of the shadow that kept me company. This shadow was growing. And growing. And growing. And growing. I thought I could see roots and the small shoots of leaves forming along the shadow's figure. I had begun to feel a bit disconcerted with its presence, but I was in a maze of grief. Still, I was unsure if it was possible to hallucinate something so intricate for so long. This thing had followed me everywhere, always getting bigger and always present. I hid my uneasiness behind liquor. I drank every night until I fell asleep, stringing up the same dreams of a peaceful blue house by the mountain where Amber was still alive, still my wife, and I had a child yet to welcome to this world. Last night, I had the same dream. I was alive again, greeted by the warm smile and calm demeanor of a woman to whom I had promised my life. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon, and I could hear the sizzling of a pan. I was not sure what she was cooking this time. Dreams are weird like that, but I remember approaching her from behind, nestling my chin into her shoulder as I closed my eyes. She laughed. I told her how much I missed her. She told me she knew. It was strange how vivid this dream had been. I could recount most of the details, and it was painfully peaceful. We ate together, watched a movie together. Held each other. "You've got a visitor." I was startled. She spoke clearly and crisply. I turned to look her in her eyes, my voice calm but muddled. "A visitor? You can't stay long," she said. "You've got something to tend to." I laughed, shaking my head. "I'm staying here as long as I can. I'm serious." I tilted my head, now a wave of bewilderment washing over me. Who would visit me now? She did not answer, instead smiling faintly and saying a meager few words. "Be safe." The dream tore away from me, and I awoke laying in my bed, my face sweaty as I bolted upwards, staring into the darkness of my house. I was in my empty house again. I let my eyes adjust to the lower pitch, rubbing the crust out from under my eyelids. Outside, I could hear lightning flashing from a heavy storm, thunder crackling across the sky. It was the same room I had come to loathe. I sat on my side of the bed, her side filled with belongings of hers I had yet the heart to dispose of. The floor was littered with dirty clothes, my old work uniform, and bottles. The drawers were haphazardly opened, no longer sorted, and the television sat adjacent to the dark figure standing by the bathroom door. I jumped out of my skin. There was someone standing at the end of the room. As soon as it noticed I was awake, it moved. I shrilled, throwing the covers over my mouth as I watched wide-eyed in panic. The figure shambled forward, coming to the edge of my bed before speaking in a dry raspy voice that could be mistaken as wheezing. "Mr. Cutler," it said, his words sending an icy chill down my back. That is when my eyes fully adjusted to the darkness that surrounded us. The figure before me was dressed as a priest, his robe stained dark with dried blood and his abdomen was punctured by twigs and sharp thorns. Small black barbs lined the wood that stabbed out from him, and they were rustling violently as he stood, motionless. His skin was raw and pale, his eyes had been replaced by a dark and violently twisted bark, branches plunging out and back into his skin. His entire body was adorned with scratches and open gushes, yet he paid extraordinarily little mind to his condition. He only stared at me with missing eyes. I moved myself as close to the wall as I could as the figure stepped my way. I screamed, retracting my legs and arms as close to my chest as I could as my eyes focused on the man in front of me. "Mr. Cutler," he said again, his mouth struggling to open and close. "You've been visited by the tree." My mouth was agape as I closed my hands into fists. The rustling of the barbs on him was acutely audible, and they grew more violently as the figure stepped even closer. His breathing was labored heavily, as if he were fighting for his right to breath. "What dash? I wish you no harm, Mr. Cutler." He brought himself to the edge of the bed, the outlines of the branches at a stark contrast to his pale figure. He sat down, turning achingly slow to face me. "I am simply here by my master's will," he cried out as the branches under his skin twisted, forming new holes in his torso, and contorting his limbs. Then, he let out a blood-curdling scream as the tree racked his body, bringing him to the ground, spinning and rolling before he regained control. Moments passed and he slowly stood back upright as if nothing had happened, his body now covered in disgusting growths. "It's using you," I said through seething teeth. "You're letting it, and it's eating you alive dash. That is such a primitive way of looking at it." His voice boomed across the house, and I began to feel goosebumps grow on my skin. The pain in my arm flared, and the tree began to creep further along the walls of the kitchen, branches extending over the back door. I turned to where the front of the house was, small twigs now blocking the exit. The priest made his way to me, holding an outstretched hand, the barbs whistling at me as he came closer. I stood further back. You must understand it only wants to give you a new purpose. I mumbled, fear overtaking me again as I refused to look at the figure standing before me. And what has it done for you? It saved me as I died. I spent my last weeks running from it, very much like you are. But I could never get away. And so, in my dying breaths, no longer able to escape, I embraced it. It has burdened me with the truth of our world and the world beyond, the world of the true form, and now I act as its agent so that others may see the light as I have. I began to stand, inching closer to the staircase. So that's it then, you let it kill you? It didn't kill me. It gave me a new life. No, I died because of something far more mundane. He turned to me with empty sockets, a new darkness filling his gaze. Before he spoke, I could feel my heart accelerate, and my body stiffened as my fear was turning into something far more primal. He coughed up blood and glass before speaking again. The cause of my death was an automobile accident. I felt the temperature of the room rise from the dreary cold I was now beginning to grow used to. In the back, the tree was beginning to grow again. A car accident? Precisely that. At that point, his grin became deep, and his eye sockets grew darker as he poised himself to confront me directly. Now, Mr. Cutler, would you like to know on which intersection? No. I could feel my skin rise, my hairs straightening out and my blood begin to boil. My mind drifted off to Amber, to the news the doctor gave me, the night spent in the hospital. Tears welled in my eyes as the tree grew. No. It was on East Meridian and 12th Avenue dash. Stop talking. I could hear the rustling of that tree as the branches began to expand and the walls exploded with thin growth. I stood straight, ignoring the pain in my arm as I stood to face the figure before me, gripping the knife in my hand. I saw the other vehicle coming. It was a yellow sedan, wasn't it? I do not remember the exact details, I was quite drunk dash. I screamed as a fist cut through the air and landed in the center of his face. He stumbled back, and I brought another blow to the other side, the force causing him to meagerly shamble closer to the tree. He laughed, the needles hissing in a viscous cacophony. She works in mysterious ways, wouldn't you agree? But alas, it's just a faint stroke of paint in a larger frame. Tears dripped from my face as the rustling of the tree grew in intensity. I stood in a spooky house, alone and cut off from the world as I began to realize what I had done. The tree had grown, its branches beginning to poke away from the walls and the kitchen all but enveloped. The walls of my house were becoming a mess of vines, barbs, and branches, and the flowers were all pointing towards me, opening and closing like salivating mouths. The priest smiled, and I glared at him with bloodshot eyes. You killed my family. You took my child's future away. You took everything I lived for dash. No, Mr. Cutler. I haven't taken everything from you. He stepped forward, branches of the tree following him as he stepped my way. Not yet anyways. But I will. And it will be for your own good. You will embrace the tree dash. Hate your tree. Vines snaked around his ankles, extending across the floor like a dark labyrinth. Do you know what she said in her dying breaths? She kept calling out your name. Now, you should understand that speaking with a punctured lung is exceedingly difficult, but she did try dash. I could feel my legs wobble as my body grew weak. I stammered towards the stairs, turning away from the tree and the priest, my back exposed. And your daughter was going to be a fantastic doctor. She would have saved so many lives. I fell to the wall, my bloody arm feeling loose. I could hear the tree approaching. Please, I sobbed. I don't want any of this. You would have had a son as well, he said. Would you like to know more about him? The tree erupted as I was plunged into a wave of grief. The priest stood, his broken arms outstretched. I held the knife in my hand, turning quickly and placing it in his chest. I was close to the corpse's face, his missing eyes peering into my soul. Blood trickled down from where the knife stabbed into him. He smiled, grabbing my hands. I hollered as I could feel barbs penetrate my palms. I writhed and tried to pull away, but he gripped tightly. The branches protruding from the walls slowly closed the gap to me. Think about the day you lost them. Think about how miserable and alone you were at the funeral. Remember how weak it made you. Let the tree grow. Let them be your martyrs. The flowers began to open, and tendrils with sharp teeth like appendages began to emerge. The priest opened his mouth, his bottom jaw cracking as a large vine slithered from his throat. He moaned in intense pain, and for a moment his grip softened. I pulled my arms from the barbs, my skin shearing as they tried to regain a grasp. I stumbled back as he fell to his knees, shaking violently as the bloody vine grew from his mouth and onto the floor, snaking its way towards me. For a brief second, I could see panic in his demeanor, and he reached out as if he were begging for me to end his suffering. I had extraordinarily little sympathy for this man. My hands had become a mess, deep lashes oozing dark blood that fell to the floor. The pain was near unbearable, and I held the bloody stumps towards my chest as I shambled up the stairs. Flashes of lightning outside were muddled by the oppressive growing of the tree. Vines snapped at my ankles as I limped toward the hallway, blood oozing onto my shirt. I pressed my body against the wall, branches slithering into the hall from my bedroom. I turned behind to see the priest crawling up the steps, the vine wailing in the air as it was trying to grip onto me. I thought I could hear him begging for help. I was surrounded. There was only one way to go. I turned towards the nursery, pain flaring through my hands as I gripped the door, turned the lock, and fell through. The room had been so far untouched. The walls were a bright pink, and it was mostly empty save for a crib and boxes of clothes that we bought to prepare for the child. I slammed the door behind me, slumping against the frame as I heard the rustling encroach behind me. Something large bumped into the door and it bulged against my back. I yelped as I heard the wheezing of the priest as he slammed his body into the door. I gripped the frame, pushing myself against the crib with the force of my whole body, closing my eyes as I could feel the encroaching darkness suffocating me. I was ready to escape this nightmare. I thought of our last week. I thought of our last month. The banging on the door was intensifying, and I could hear small vines coming over the top of the door. I thought of the day that we painted the nursery. It was the same day that I promised Amber I would quit smoking forever. I faintly remember the smell of paint, the bright sun, and the shared optimism we had. I handed her my lighter, telling her I was officially clean and that our child would breathe clean air. The door was busting on the edge. The rustling was deafening. "I'm going to join you," I said. She looked up at me, a look of confusion on her face. "What about your own life?" I shook my head. "I'm afraid it's over." The house in this dream was bright and warm as I remembered it. We danced momentarily like that day we painted the nursery. I held her tightly as she gripped my torso. Then, she pulled herself towards me, whispering with a faint sadness in her voice. "You can't let it win." I trembled. I could hear my own screams coming from somewhere behind me, struggling against a door that was ready to give in at any moment. "There's nothing I can do." She pulled away, and I could see the look in her eye. "If you let it consume you, then this would be the last we ever see each other." She pulled the lighter out of her pocket, putting it in my palm. "Please." "What?" "It's time to move on," she said. She hugged me one last time. I weakly reciprocated. "I don't know if I can." I stood motionless, waiting for an affirming word, or something telling me that I did not need to go through with this. When I did not get one, I nodded. Instead, I could only mutter one word. "Okay. We will always be here, waiting. I promise." My eyes tore open as the door busted open against the weight of the tree. I stood back in the nursery, staring into the maw of darkness as it crept forward. My despair turned to anger as I clenched my fists. At the forefront was the priest. He held his hand out and spoke again. "It's time to come with us," he said. There was something metal in my left hand. I opened it, looking at the small lighter I had tossed months ago, yet now it was here. I could feel the weight in my heart lift as the tree grew into the room, the walls and the ceiling becoming victims to its might. I turned towards the crib, and with a hissing shrill, I pulled one of the boards from it, ignoring the scathing pain in my arms. The vines were beginning to descend from the ceiling, sharp tendrils lined with teeth and barbs. I kept my head low as I ripped open the boxes with my fingers, grabbing the clothes we had stored. I tied as much as I could around the end of the board, working as hastily as I could with trembling fingers. Once I had the makeshift torch in hand, I gave one last look at the priest, then flicked the lighter on. He winced as his abdomen sprang open with vines, and I lit the torch. My blood boiled as I ran into the edge of the room, the fire growing in intensity as the tree enveloped me in its twigs. I twisted my foot, tossing the torch into the darkness. The vines grabbed at me, and I could do extraordinarily little but cry out as the fire flared in the hallway. The priest hissed, and the tree stopped moving for a moment. The vines started to flail as the abomination caught fire, and my house was filled with a horrifying shrieking. I pulled my arms from the now weak tendrils. The priest shrieked, his clothes catching fire as his skin began to crisp. "Cutler, what the hell do you think you're doing?" He retreated into the hallway, tumbling down the stairs as the rest of the house began to envelop in flame. The tree continued to shrivel and twist away in defiance, the smoke clogging the air, the sound of wood popping and sparks flying. Outside, I could hear the lightning intensify as I got up from the nursery floor, covering my mouth with shredded arms. For once, the tree ignored me as I made my way to the hallway, faltering down the stairs. I knocked into the pictures hanging from the wall, their frames coming to the ground as the frame of the house gave in to the flames. Pictures of me and Amber burned behind me as I continued to look forward, my feet giving away as I fell to the lobby of the house. I pressed myself up, watching as the ceiling erupted into a bright red and orange light. The tree retreated into the corner, and I was left alone inside of a burning house. Behind me, the door was kicked open, and I could hear heavy footsteps as arms came up from behind me. My feet dragged behind as I was pulled away from the fire. I struggled to my feet when we made it to the patio, letting the firefighters carry me as my vision blurred. When my vision became less fuzzy, I found myself sat on the tailgate of an ambulance, ash smeared across my face and arm, sitting still under a warm blanket. A firefighter walked up to me, his helmet brought to his chest. "Was there anyone else with you inside?" I turned to the burning entrance, the dark shape of a contorted figure staring at me from the flame. I saw branches poking from his body, and he stood motionless for a few moments before turning into the fire, engulfing himself in the flame. I shook my head no. A paramedic stood in front of me, a flashlight shining into my face. "Your house was struck by lightning last night, and our fire department is going to do everything in their power to save what they can." I watched as the blue house by the mountain withered away, burning, its ashes escaping into the night. My arms were lifted, the paramedics commenting on the mangled skin and deep lashes. They asked me if I knew what had happened. I told them I had no recollection. The last thing I remember from that night was the ambulance driver telling me everything was going to be okay. I nodded, and for the first time in months, I smiled.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.